What's the E word? It's the E in DEI that everyone ignores, but we're here to bring it to the forefront. Welcome to the E word.
Hey Brittany,
Hello, how's it going?
how you doing?
Well, you know, I'm okay. How are you?
Listen, I'm hanging in there, life is busy, although I hate that word busy, right? Hectic, we need to come up with new
Mm.
words. But whatever it is, guess what I found time for?
What did you find time for?
I found time to read. And I read this article that I think we need to talk about. Okay.
Okay, tell me more.
So it's an article that's referencing, and I'm reading it here, the McKinsey and LeanIn.org. It's 2022. It's 20 from 2022, so I missed this one. Women in the Workforce.
Okay,
Okay. And I'm going to
okay.
read this excerpt because this is kind of crazy.
Hmm.
So it says Black women leaders are more ambitious than other women at their level. 59% of Black women leaders want to be top executives compared to 49% of women leaders overall. But they are also more likely than women leaders of other races and ethnicities to receive signals that it will be harder for them to advance. The report says compared to other women at their level, Black women leaders are more likely to have colleagues question their competence and to be subjected to demeaning behavior. And one of 3 Black women leaders says that they've been denied or passed over for opportunities because of personal characteristics, including their race and gender. And this report covered 40,000 employees. So I'm stunned by this metric. All right. 59% of women, they want to be top level executives, but they're being questioned in the workplace. Like,
Yeah.
this totally resonates for me. I'm just going to just a couple of stats that I think are really important from this too. It says
Let's hear it.
20% of Black women leaders experience, quote, having someone say or imply that you're not qualified, compared to 12% of all women and 6% for all men. 38% of Black women leaders experience, quote, being mistaken for someone at a lower level, compared to 26% for all women and 13% for all men. And finally, the last stat I'll hit you with is 55% of Black women leaders experience, quote, having your judgment questioned, compared to 39% of all women and 28% of all men. So
Wow.
I'm just taken aback by this because, first of all, what kind of strikes me first and foremost, right, is this old stereotype that we always have to shake off, that Black people are lazy, and we don't want anything, which
Hmm.
has always been false. But here's the data, right? And the data
Hmm.
is clearly showing that particularly Black women, they want to rise, they want to achieve those top levels, but they're being held back by perception yet again, which is the root of inequity.
Yeah. And perception is reality, right? And so their ability to advance is only allowed by their ability to be perceived as a leader. But that's the difference between being bossy and having executive leadership, being aggressive versus being assertive, being loud or, being passionate. What do you think? And I guess the question then becomes, assuming there's a Black woman leader who is listening, or someone who wants to support a Black woman in her pursuit of leadership?
Mm.
What advice would you give them?
Mm. You know, it's interesting. I was asked a similar question when I was at a conference that was primarily for college students, right? So they
Mhm.
were really asking, like, how can they be their authentic selves? Because that's something that I had talked about, that at this age, right, it's much easier for me. But there's a privilege that comes with my time and experience and age that I have to recognize when I give this advice, right? That if you're 20 something years old,
Right.
you know, you may not have that yet. But one of the things that I think is really important, just in general as a human being, is for you to understand and lean into your strengths, know what those are, right? And build them into
Mhm.
your personal brand. And when you know yourself, that is where your true power comes from, right?
Mhm.
It's going to be hard to convince people that they should accept you because some of these things are beyond your control, right? Your race and your gender,
Right.
like there's nothing you can really do about that. There's preconceptions that come along with that. From my generation, though, you know, obviously we know about those, and we were always trying to transcend those by proving that we didn't fall into those, I don't know, stereotypical categories. So we're always doing more than what we needed to do, or in many different facets, whether it's the work, whether it's how we show up. And um, I really kind of hate to say this, but I think that still holds true for this generation until, you know, these mindsets change, right? Because we are
Mhm.
still not viewed the same. I'm not sure, from my perspective, that there is obviously a ton an individual person can do other than show up and show up as your best self and know who you are. I guess I would more want to flip that to the corporations, right, and people working for them, and the not basically the non-BIPOC people, is how are you going to show up and evaluate, right, people differently and not according to these so-called biases that's been ingrained in your experience, so-called experiences throughout your lifetime. So I don't know that I have the great.
Yeah. Yeah, this makes me think of, again, the perception and the bias and the broader conversation that we have around identity politics,
Mm,
right? Because if we cannot relate to, or very often in the pursuit of leadership roles, there's this encouragement to deny anything that will make you different or distinguish you outside of prior archetypes of what a leader has been.
yeah.
But if we look at the early 20th century, identity politics were exactly the thing that forwarded American society, that created opportunities for wealth and ingenuity, right? So a little Italy, a Chinatown, right? These are these opportunities for um, that have enriched American society, but also created pathways to wealth for various groups, right? And we would never, I have not seen it in leadership where they would tut someone for, celebrating St. Patrick's Day, or Lent, or, any of these things. And yet, and still, we're now in an increasingly globalized world. We have more access to the world. We see that some of the fastest growing markets are the markets in Latin America, in Africa. And now we want to eschew identity politics.
Mm,
Now this is something that we do not see as a means for opportunity. And so I guess I'm curious to know how, and you brought up a great point, right? Which is um, Black women leaders listening to this, hopefully they're like, finally, someone, someone gets it. But it's the non-BIPOC people listening that really have to tune in, because then the next question is, okay, well, great. If I accept that identity politics are not a threat and represent opportunity, if I accept that Black women have incredible potential and desire to be in leadership, how can I reframe my preconceived notions about Black women, who they are, where they should be? You brought up the fact that they have been mistaken for people in lower roles than them
Yeah.
is a huge, that's a huge, huge blind spot, right?
Totally. I mean, I think there's a couple of things, right? Which is part of it is about competition, right? So, you and I already know as Black women, right? Like Black people, Black women are a force to be reckoned with. We are highly educated. We are incredibly intelligent and smart. This is historical, back to, our time in Africa. If you really go back to African history and really take a look at the role of Black women in general, it's just America's stereotypes and gender politics that pushes to the bottom of the rung. But at the end of the day, it's about competition, and people who are working with Black women, with Black people in general, right? It's about fear. It's about fear of someone taking over what they have. It's loss of that privilege. And, when you operate from a place of fear, that's when everybody loses. And so, there's work to do on an individual basis, right? Me as let's say me as the non-BIPOC person, what kind of cultural understandings do I need to come to grips with and really understand my background and what I was taught, and then also fight against some of the things that are happening in society that's trying to basically hide that information from me. Ask, why are we trying to hide that information, and how can I be a part of the solution? Then there's like on a corporate aspect, which is, what is your philosophy? What's your mission? How are you going to, fully embrace, the global perspectives that are part of your organization, and really eschew them throughout the company, and make sure that everybody is aware and practicing and working towards all that. And I also want to kind of go back to something I said a little earlier about, there's not much on an individual level that people of color can do. I still think on an individual level, it's a little harder, but on a collective level, there's a lot that we can do, right? Too often we are the only one in the room, right? And we know being the only one it's very hard to make a change. But if there's more of us in the room, then we have more power. And so on an individual level, how can we bring more of us along, right? And on a collective level, how do we learn to work cooperatively again? Because we used to do that back in the day, right? Back in when.
Yes.
How do we remember how to do that?
For Black leaders, and especially Black women leaders, you kind of have two paths, right? You can keep your head down and be appreciative that you got to that point and toe the line and create that sense of safety. And if I'm being empathetic, I can understand why someone, everyone has obligations and responsibilities and personal goals and professional goals. And I understand that. But that I I'll say tongue in cheek, that's the kind of the Clarence Thomas way. Right? It's just into the space and no, don't let anyone else come in, right? Don't rock the boat.
Yeah.
But then you also create a space. There's another path where you can um be the first. And I think, both of us have been the first in many respects. And we're also like, okay, but we're living in the future, right? And so cool, we're the first to do XYZ. We shouldn't have had to be. So how can we make sure that we're not the last, the only? But in creating that space, then comes the challenge of perfectionism, right?
Mm.
Because you cannot afford to make a mistake because there's always the threat of erasure and erasing the possibility of allowing others into the room. So I'm curious to know your perspective on how we can make way for Black women leaders um, with and allow room for them to grow, to make mistakes without it being, the end of a Black woman leader.
One, it's choosing organizations that hopefully, right? Like, they say it, but hopefully mean it when they say that they allow room for that, right? So being very particular about where you spend your time. You spend most of your time at work, right? It is
Mhm.
a marriage of some sort. And if it's not suiting your needs, not being afraid to leave and find somewhere else that's going to do that. Secondly, it is bring more people along. Don't be afraid to model that behavior of allowing people to make mistakes and forgiving them for it and growing them through it. But I think when you find that you bring more people along in that way and you fill rooms with more diverse cultures, backgrounds, faces, more people that look like you will find that you will have more room for that, right?
Mhm.
If you're alone, right, and you are surrounded by the stereotypes that invade our society, you're just going to have less room for it, right? But so you need to create the environment that's going to create the safety for you. It's a shame that you have to do that, but you have to do that, right? It's just more work that
Right.
Black people have to do. But once we do that, right, we start to create the fabric of that organization where that kind of, that grows and hopefully stays, and we don't have to worry about that so much. So if you are the first, it is really your responsibility to bring many more people along, not just one, right? I was watching, I'm on LinkedIn all the time, and there was
Yeah.
from Bozoma St. John, who's former CMO of Netflix. And she was talking about her hiring practices. And, she was, hiring people. They happened to be either mostly Black or mostly people of color. I can't remember, but HR contacted her and was like,
Mhm.
what's going on? She's like, what do you mean? you know, and
Right.
they were like, basically it was this call to the office. They're like, why are you hiring so many? I'm going to say people of color. I don't know if they were all.
Right.
He's like, I don't understand why you're asking me that, because when other people are hiring all white people, are you calling them to the office? Right. And of course, the answer is no. So it's also being able to talk those truths. Again, Bozoma was in a position of power and privilege, right? So we have to always
Mhm.
remember who's saying these things, but that's why it's really important to bring other people along.
Yeah. And then you mentioned perception. And of course, there's one would hope that in your marketing expertise, there's the cognizance of perception. You also shared some interesting facts around biases. Can we pivot there? Because
Oh my gosh, yes.
kind of blew my mind.
Because I've been reading.
Exactly.
even reading. Okay. So there's this other article, I'll pull it up. It's on CNBC. It's about, the title is called Women Are Held Back at Work Due to 30 Biases Out of Their Control, based on a new study.
30? 30?
Okay, so why don't we do like a quick little round? I'm gonna go through 30 of them, right?
Okay.
And you just tell me real quick if they're legal or not from your,
Okay.
right? Okay, so okay. Number one, accent.
That is not protected. That's not a protected class.
Not a protected class. So basically, if I start to
It's
bust off
legal.
a Jamaican accent, right? Right? Start right, but it's legal. You could all right.
Yes. We should also note that this is not in any way meant to be construed as legal advice to
exactly.
anyone.
We're having some fun. We're having some fun. All right.
Yes. Okay.
Although I will say, with the accent, I remember navigating a conversation with two, I'll call it a miscommunication at this point, but someone thought they were being discriminated against. That's a hard term, right? Because of their accent, right? And so we had to navigate that conversation. It turns out that wasn't really the case. Actually, both people had different accents, right? It was something different, but it was a tension point, which was interesting. Age.
Age is a protected class.
Attractiveness.
That is not a protected class. I mean, attractiveness, one would hope, is incredibly subjective. Any biologist listening would say, oh, it comes down to facial symmetry, but attractiveness is more than just your face. So,
and you can't control that. Okay, that's another thing.
You can't control that.
Along with age. Okay, like you are as old as you are. Now, you might not look it, but whatever. Body size.
So this is something that is very controversial. As it stands, there's no federal protections against discriminating on body size. But again, we have emerging conversations around fat phobia and how that shows up in our belief system. So we tend to believe that people who have larger bodies are less competent or less attractive or less intelligent. So, yeah. Okay. Class. Not a protected class, at least from what I understand of, federal protections.
I mean, it's kind of general. And then there's color. These are in alphabetical order, but there's color, but that's different than race. So that's interesting.
Right. Yes. And color is actually protected. Age, color, creed. So if one is discriminating against, you do not want anyone heavily melanated, or for example, if when Elon Musk walks through the factories in California and the managers talk to all of the people who are of color and tells them to get to the back of the room so they can't be seen, that is a violation of a protected class.
And it's making me think of also actors, right? When you're trying to typecast or role, does that have, again, this is not legal advice, right? We're just talking, but like, does that have some wiggle room when we think about Hollywood?
It does. Yeah. I read an article recently where they talked about, the application of the manic pixie dream girl to Black women and how that character, who is fanciful and free and eclectic and an oddball, but also has this ethereal beauty, is almost always light-skinned, right? And how most of the actresses who are successful within Black Hollywood are light-skinned.
Yes.
most of the singers who have success, especially within hip hop or R&B or pop, are light skinned.
Yeah. I think Viola Davis does a whole thing about, you know, being dark-skinned Black women in Hollywood and how she still isn't receiving, I guess, what she truly deserves compared to what her, you know, what her achievements are compared to
her accolades are. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and white women. Okay, we also have communication style.
Not protected. That's, again, something that is
Subjective.
Can be somewhat subjective, yeah.
Cultural identity.
That's tough. When I read that as creed, which is, again, a protected class, because there are some people who, for example, may say, I'm culturally Jewish, right? And that would be protected. So kind of it depends on that one.
Dietary restrictions. This is interesting.
This in and of itself is not protected unless it is in conjunction with, again, another protected class like religion or something like that.
But I can see this being a bias, right? Because being like, I see this all the time in terms of, you know, you go to an event and, are you a vegan? Are you not a vegan? But there's just different layers of that. And that's not really considered. Or, you know, people who eat anything have like multiple choices, but vegans only have like one choice. And there's and there's a stigma around that, and having to cater to that, there's also a stigma around that as well. So I see that all the time. It's more, it feels like more low key, maybe because I eat everything, but it still feels like if I were on the other side of that, I would not be satisfied.
Try having a gluten intolerance or gluten allergy and going to a continental breakfast, right? Where all you get are bagels and all of that. It's not pleasant. Bagels and muffins and all of the things you can't eat.
Yes, I went gluten-free for what I thought was a health issue for a while. That was so tough. I don't know how people, you know, allergic can deal. Education.
Nope.
So that's interesting. I mean, I know it's not protected, but it also feels, we're talking about biases here, but also in some ways feels discriminatory to some degree, because, you know, you have a lot of jobs that require a degree in order for you to be considered for them, some of which don't really need a degree, right? Like there are definitely, you know, occupations like, I don't know, medical, right? Or accounting. But a lot of other things don't. And I know society's trying to like parse this away and rethink that, but I don't know, it leaves a lot of people at a disadvantage.
100%. There are tons of law firms who are only hiring people from the top 10 law school, you know, or, you know, just the top 5. And regardless of how someone's performed in their law school of choice, you know, they say no thanks.
Employment history.
Not protected.
Ethnicity.
Protected.
Gender conformance.
Emerging, but yes, you are well, sex and gender are very different, but as we see all across the country, you know, we're still wrestling with that. So yeah, definitely depends.
More to come on that one.
Yes.
Health.
Yeah, you know, we have the Americans, you know, disability, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Does it stop people from having a bias against those who require different accommodations? No, but ostensibly one should be protected.
Right.
In that.
Intellectual ability.
Tying it back again to the ADA, if there's some sort of disability, definitely protected. Yeah.
It also feels a little subjective, right?
100%. If I don't think that you're smart because, you know, you don't, play Sudoku or whatever, like that's
Well, people just think differently. They
incredibly
have different
subjective.
strengths, right? And
Yes.
people just might not think like you, and that
Yeah.
should be looked at as an asset, not as negative.
Yeah.
Um,
Neurodivergence is real.
exactly. Marital status.
No.
It's interesting. I mean, as I'm going through this list and we're talking about the legality of it, these are the things just to remind us that, women are judged on, that
100%.
so if you're
I've
not,
had friends,
yeah,
yeah, exactly, who were young single women and have been told, oh my gosh, do you have a boyfriend? Because their thinking is you're going to get married soon and have a baby, and I'm going to have to replace you, and I don't feel like hiring you.
oh my gosh.
Or if you're newly married, right, then you're going to have a baby. And then, there's this whole thing. Conversely, when you're hiring a single woman, very often there's the belief that you can pay her less, right? She doesn't have a family to support. So you're leaning on certain biases to make legitimate business decisions that are not rooted in any sort of fact.
Mm, wow. There's a lot
Yeah.
that goes into what people think. Nationality.
Mm-hmm. I would say that's arguably under creed,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah.
Yeah, TBD on that. Occupation
Mhm.
and occupational position. So,
Not protected, but we definitely know that there are biases, right? If you're a C-level person, you're having a different conversation than if you're an associate.
I mean, that kind of rolls into class,
Mm-hmm.
I think I was reading something about like there's a corporate caste system, that type of thing. And
Yep.
again, the
Yep.
power and privilege that comes with that. Um, I was just thinking back to, as you were, it just popped in my mind, an organization. I don't know that they do this now, but back in the day, this organization, if you wanted to join it, you had to be of a certain stature, right, to
Mm-hmm.
join it, right? So they looked at your marital status, they looked at your occupation, your position, they looked at all of those things and to judge whether you could, make it into this organization. I don't know that they do that so much now. And it was interesting because I wasn't married. I didn't think I was going to get in the organization. I did leave it a few years later, but I didn't think I was going to. But I was like, if that's your metric, we're going to have a problem.
Right. Right. Right.
But they didn't have to deal with that. So then we have parental status. Now, parental status, why would this be something that, oh, parental. Okay, I'm thinking about my parents. No, you as a parent. Okay. It's just like,
Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly.
yeah.
Um, Definitely biases. There are varied protections across the country to protect um, parents, but even men do not, or non-birthing parents do not have the same access to parental leave that the birthing parent does. So,
mm.
yeah.
I'm going to skip down to pregnancy because I think that's part of it as well. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there's personality traits.
No, so subjective.
Physical ability.
Depends on if it qualifies as a disability, but again, if this person is just not athletic, you may come to certain beliefs about them that are not rooted in any sort of fact.
Right. Or maybe there's certain jobs that people that need a certain level of ability for physical labor, but that doesn't necessarily mean that women can't do it. That's just
Right.
to believe that we can.
Right. If you don't think she can lift 20 pounds, in her role.
Right.
Yeah.
We have political preferences, and I'm just going to put that next to religion. Those are protected, not protected. Religion, right?
Religion is protected. Political preferences.
No.
It's I mean, I guess you could see it as a violation of one's freedom of speech, First Amendment rights. But so we could say protected.
Protected. Residential location.
Not protected.
But you're judged based on where you live, right?
Right. When you have that, if you say you live in Manhattan versus Harlem, there's a different reaction, right? Oh. Oh.
Yep, you're actually right. And then you are stereotyped based on that. Seniority, sexual orientation.
Yep. So we know sexual orientation is protected and growing in its protections. Seniority, there's no, nothing saying that we can't discriminate against people. In fact, very often that's how you gauge the decision-making process, right? An associate does not have the same ability to make decisions as a director or a manager. Yeah.
And finally, we have veteran status.
Veteran status is protected. If you've ever filled out a job application, you get that question, right? Are you a veteran? Are you a United States veteran?
Yep. I mean, again, this is kind of crazy. I know, some of these are protected, some of these are just really subjective, but there's so many things that were subjective that are beyond someone's control. I mean, some things like, I guess you can control your political preferences, right? Or maybe you can control your personality traits. I don't know, because some people need, right? But most of these things on this list, there's just, it is what it is, right? And apparently women are judged more harshly against these 30 things. And what does that mean for us, right? How do we combat the things we can't control?
Right. Or may not even be aware of. I don't know if our listeners realize that they are regularly being judged based on these 30 things, at least, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do you create space and opportunity when you can't, there's nothing to, it's so subjective, you don't want to come in and then ask your manager, do you find me attractive? Can I be clear about that? Is my choice to remain child-free or to reproduce, how is that going to impact me within this next calendar year? I mean, very few people are having these conversations, right? And yet it matters.
Well, I think that's really why it's important for, obviously, organizations to create, environments that welcome so many different people and of different body types, languages, cultures, backgrounds, but also, like, as I said before, like, choose your company, right? Choose where you want to spend your time. Look at the people who are working there. I know if it's remote, it's a little bit more difficult to really get the full, like, landscape of things. But, when you're going into the office for an interview, really scope this place out. Like, they're interviewing you, but you're interviewing them as well. So you want to be in a place that's going to welcome who you are as a person. It's sad. I mean, I'm laughing, but a lot of this stuff is really kind of sad because a lot of things you can't change, and like you said, we're not aware of, and you walk into these spaces feeling like you're showing up, and people are shutting you down,
Right.
because on top of potentially your race and ethnicity and your gender, right, which are the top things, right, you're being judged for your size, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you happen to mention that you're married with kids in the interview, you don't know how
Right.
that's being taken. I've known people that, when they are interviewing and they are pregnant, they don't say anything because for fear that
Right.
to prevent them from getting hired, or people who are in their roles and they are pregnant and they wait till the last minute, because technically I think you don't have to say anything until you're about ready to leave. Like you could be
Exactly. And no one can approach you about that. I had a friend who she pretty much waited until she could no longer ignore the bump in the room, right? And her direct manager, also a woman, said to her, "Congratulations, you just ruined your career." When
that's
she said, "Hey, listen, I'm pregnant and I'm gonna need to go out on leave." Incredibly demoralizing.
that is insane. When you could create a space that um, allows people to come out earlier with that type of information and feel safe, and then put plans in place to make sure there's
Sure.
a transition, that work is not disrupted, and that welcomes her back when it's time,
Right.
right? And there can be continuity. It's just around planning for that, and not
Yeah.
fearing that something terrible is going to happen, because that fear creates the domino effect that's ultimately going to affect your business. And you're actually placing it on the person who got pregnant when you can really plan around that. We're smart enough to do those things. We just choose not to.
We live in the future, right? We have technology. I mean, I've spoken to senior leaders, incredible women who expressed fear and anxiety about updating their headshots because I don't want to look older,
Mm,
right? Or it was a huge leap for them to say, "Oh my gosh, this is my first time that I'm, posting a headshot and I have silver hair now." And some of them have embraced it fiercely, but these are not the same considerations that men who may update it, and he's a silver fox, right? And wow, he's so accomplished. And we look at him, we don't say, "Oh my gosh, this old guy," right? We look and we say, "Oh wow, he's distinguished, he's accomplished, he's got a lot going on." But unfortunately, women do not receive that same grace. We look and we see, "Oh my gosh, is she, you know,
mhm. And
are
we
her best days behind her?"
and we as women judge too, right? So
Yep.
not just men
Yep.
are judging women, but women are judging women. And I think it starts with women really just helping to embrace who we are, and to try to, break through all of that nonsense. Um, because if we're waiting for somebody else to do it, we're going to be waiting forever, right? And
Right.
Black women need to do it. White women need to do it. Asian, whatever. All of us need to do that and really stand for our true values. I mean, there's not enough of us in general, when we talk about women in general, that are in positions of power, right? So again, talking about that upliftment that needs to come
Mhm.
through. Um, and then when you break that down, it's even less for Black women, right? And what we've started to see is because, you know, we have this Black ambition that's not being supported in the workplace, right? And for many different reasons, the competition, the threat, that whole concept of pet to threat, where you have these great
Mhm.
mentors that are supporting you through your trajectory, but the minute you become successful, they kind of back off and leave you hanging, right? This rush to put Black women in positions, but not, put the scaffolding and support systems in place, right? And now we have these hidden biases, right, that are
Mhm.
affecting everything. What it's now leading to is women leaving, particularly Black women leaving the workforce, right?
Yeah.
Becoming entrepreneurs. And I know you're seeing that, right?
Yes.
Well,
Absolutely. I think we both realized that there were other opportunities because the traditional route was not aligned with the problems that we sought to solve, and our self-concept, right? And then it's just an opportunity to say, okay, well, if not this, what else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I left corporate America very early on because, quite frankly, I don't think people did not think of me as smart or as smart as they wouldn't give me credit for my work, for credit for being intelligent. Um, and I did something that surpassed expectations. It was always downplayed. And so that just became increasingly frustrating to me because it's like, what more do I have to do? Why do I constantly have to prove my worth? Right.
Right.
And worse, I have to prove it to the people who are in control of my paycheck or deciding whether
Yes.
I get more money or can obtain more wealth and create the generational wealth that I want to obtain. And I didn't like being out, not in control of that and at the whim of somebody else's like subjective opinion about me. And so I decided to leave and go out on my own because I felt like I can control my own destiny. And, through consultative work, actually, you're hired to be the expert, to be the smart, intelligent person in the room. So
Right.
I could lean on that and build on that and build that brand around myself. So, but it was a shame that that's why I did it, because in part because of that. I mean, I loved it. I loved being able to use my acumen and my smarts and my ability to adapt and all that good stuff because I could do it. It was natural for me, right? But people didn't believe that I could and regulated my abilities.
Right.
So
Right.
I had to unleash that myself. But I see that, more and more women are having to do that. And it's a tremendous loss to the general workforce. It's a great gain to entrepreneurism. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Balance.
There does have to be balance because entrepreneurship, it is a long, lonely, frustrating, amazing, terrifying, incredibly rewarding, incredibly debilitating journey, right? You have as many ups as downs, and yet and still we still need people. There are people who are not interested in entrepreneurship, but also need to understand a pathway forward, right? We need people on all sides, and even the entrepreneurs who are building, the enterprise organizations of tomorrow, they need to remember, as you're building your teams, as you're building your businesses, remember why you started it. You can't forget your experience and seek to create an environment that just provides that trauma for someone else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to stop this, I don't know, it feels like an endless loop, disrupt it, and provide those support systems. And it relates directly to something we talked about before around, this attack on, I'm just going to call it an attack on Black people through that organization that is, now suing, the venture capital fund, the Fearless Fund. It's now going after diversity fellowship programs, specifically for legal, right? And it seems to be assault. And, it's just saddens me. It's maddening at the same time. And I just want to encourage corporations to really pay attention.
Yep.
And, don't be frightened. Use your money, use your dollars, and invest in solutions, whether that's lobbying and fighting, for, obviously social justice, but also all the other things they're doing internally, because it's really important that we don't lose this ground. Anyway,
Mic drop.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's always so much fun. We always have these deep conversations, but until next time, we'll find something. There's always something going on in this world for us to talk about.
Absolutely. That is the one constant. As soon as I saw the article about the firms, I was like, well, it's right on time.
We'll dig into that in the future.
Yes, exactly. So until next time, be well.
Right, you too. See you soon.
Right.